Hey everyone, welcome to the second day of programs for the Vancouver Art Book Fair. If you're just tuning in, I'm Vivian Sming, pronouns she, her, they, them, and I publish artist books through my studio, Sming Sming Books. And I'm this year's guest curator for the virtual program. The Vancouver Art Book Fair is committed to the advancement, appreciation, and circulation of artist publishing. The fair and programs are free and open to the public, so please consider joining their membership program. That'll help pay for artist fees and also keep all of these events accessible. And we'll share that link with you all in the chat. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the Vancouver Art Book Fair takes place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm streaming here from my home in the Bay Area on the land stewarded by the Mwekma Ohlone people. And as we're here to talk about books and publishing, I also want to acknowledge the many, many, many histories and languages that have been erased through the prioritization of paper as being the source of history, legitimacy, and value. So I offer these 2 days of programs as a way to understand how publishing can be a site of resistance, restoration, contestation, and imagination. So thanks for joining us. And for this program, I'd like to introduce Ryan Smith, who is the co-founder of Brick Press and a sessional faculty member at Emily Carr University. Brick Press is a Vancouver-based art and design bookstore and publisher that provides a platform for Canadian and international authors. Brick Press books rely on collaboration and experimentation through the medium of print. With that, here's Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Just wanting to see, can everyone see me? Yeah, great. I got a thumbs up, so I think that means we're doing good. Hi, thank you all for taking the time to be here today. As Vivian mentioned, my name is Ryan Smith, and I'm the co-founder of Brick Press. Brick Press is a Vancouver-based independent publisher, bookstore, and offset lithography printing studio that is committed to providing a platform for local and international artists. Today, I will be discussing a recent Brick Press artwork and publishing project, Reinterpreted Facsimile, Anything Co. Limited, Companies Act 2020. First off, I'd like to thank the entire Vancouver Art Book Fair team, all of its collaborators, and Vivian Sming for putting together this year's fair. It's much appreciated. This project took place at Emily Carr University, here at Brick Press and in and around the Vancouver area, all of which are located on the unceded land of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So where I'm speaking to you from today is significant, and it's a good visual reference for you to see exactly how this project came to be. I'm here at the Brick Press studio. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt, and I'm sitting in our production space near printing machines and a garbage can sized kerosene heater because it's starting to get a little bit cold. And as I mentioned, we are an independently run publishing studio, and we're co-founded in Vancouver along with my spouse, Kellen Cardall. So to elaborate on that a little bit more, we're like autonomously run. We are funded entirely by commercial printing work that we then use that revenue to offset the costs of our creative work, and we pay artist fees with the sales of books. So specifically, I'm in our offset printing and book production studio. Around me are all the tools and machines needed to make books from start to finish. So like you might be able to see behind me, I've got an offset printing press. It's a 2-color AB Dick 9805. It's what we use for most of our work. But aside from that, we have just a plethora of digital and analog printing machines, book binding machines, so things like perfect binders and saddle stitchers and coil binders, and just lots and lots of tools so that we can make books here. Brick Press relies on in-house production for much of its work, and we do that in an effort to keep production costs as low as possible, so that the books we make are as accessible as can be. So I'm going to bring up my presentation now, and I'm going to ask I'm going to start sharing one of my desktops here. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm doing this right. So forgive me for a moment while I get going. So just to check, you can see we've got the first slide. So you can't see me anymore, I don't think, but you can see my slides. But I'm going to keep talking and sliding through these presentations. So we can see that this project deals with facsimile and reinterpreted facsimile. I'm going to define these in the coming slides as well. But this project's primary outcome was the physical reprinting of Companies Act, a book published originally in 1978 by Anything Co. So who is Anything Co? Anything Co, otherwise known as Netco, was a collaborative conceptual art duo based in North Vancouver, run by co-presidents Ingrid and Ian Baxter. They incorporated themselves in 1969 and used an obscured business model to interrogate art, domestic systems, corporate strategy, and everyday life through their use of photography, information technology, and installation-based works. They challenged the stereotypes of who made art and what art could be, and they were most active in the 1960s and 1970s. Netco was celebrated widely around the world and in North America, especially in Vancouver. They play a significant part in Canada's rich historical art history and are a group that I've admired for many years. I think it's also important to mention, while we're talking about Anything Co. in the 1960s and 1970s in Vancouver, they certainly weren't the only people doing work like they did. So when thinking of Vancouver and thinking of Canada, it's important to mention groups like Image Bank and Video In and Western Front and General Idea and things like this. I'm sure that I've missed some people or groups, but it's good to just sort of mention that as well. So we're going to talk about Companies Act. What is Companies Act? Aside from Netco's conceptual works, they were very active in the world of publishing. All of their books are out of print and relatively sought after. Pardon me. However, it's my opinion that Companies Act is perhaps their most vital book work, partly because I came to realize that very few people actually knew about it. And after extensive research, I realized that the contents in the book themselves are extremely valuable to art historians and also to just others who admire the group. The book itself was originally made as an artwork for Kunsthal Basel's 1978 exhibition, Younger Canadian Artists. In 1977, Kunsthal curator Jean-Christophe Amann came to Canada and knew that Netco would represent Canada. But the question was how, with a body of work such as Netco's, which was just massive for the years that they were working. Their oeuvre was just gigantic, and his idea is that one work just wouldn't suffice, and the idea of a telephone book-like publication or compendium of company ideas would be the only suitable way to present Netco to the visitors of the exhibition in Switzerland. Companies Act contains 365 collage-like pages compiling a near complete history of Netco and the duo's activities and ideas, which includes Ingrid and Ian Baxter's personal histories and how Netco came to be. And below each of the 365 pages are handwritten notes by Netco, and they just provide spectacular insight into the duo's process and intent. We're going to go through and I'll talk a little bit about the book. So this is an original copy. Pardon me, we've got some sirens. I'm beside a fire station in the Vancouver downtown east side. So there's a lot of those happening at the moment. I'm going to let them pass for a second. But you can see here that we've got the Companies Act book. This is the copy from 1978. The story actually begins at McLeod's Books in 2012, where I found another Anything Co book called A Portfolio of Piles, but at that time I couldn't afford it. And this was sort of the consolation I was saddened to sort of find that I couldn't get the Portfolio Piles book by the next time it had been sold. But coincidentally, this project, or the more affordable choice that day, ended up being a bit more of a significant story. So this is a 1978 copy. You see it's been very well worn and very well read, presumably well loved by at least more than 2 owners. And I'll show you what's inside of it. So this is a scan of the very front page of the new, or the cover of the new edition that we made. So through editing and graphic design and on-press techniques, we've kept a lot of these aesthetic elements of the previous. And I'll talk about that as well too. But moving forward, so you see here, we've got the very first page. And this is the original, or one of the original booksellers' prices. And I'm not sure, I don't think that was McLeod's, because in 2012, I think I paid about $200 for the book. But elements like this, I decided to keep in the book. And so it's funny, you might see those in some parts. And so we've got a little letter that prefaces the book, and it sort of just says that, for many years, Anything Co. has wanted to do a compendium of company ideas, activities, and works. And it kind of talks about how Jean-Christophe Amann came from Switzerland and helped make that possible. And then moving on, this is a good example of other types of things in the book here. So as some might know, Anything Co. was well known for using language and words and phrases and acronyms in their work, and that language was sort of integral to bring people into their concepts. So here we've got a Anything Co. glossary, and then there's these notes, and it just sort of has this insight that says Netco terminology used to describe culture and the various arts functioning inside the idea of cultural knowledge. Which is great to sort of see. And then moving on, another example of a page from the book is the, we've got buttons and stamps and lots of really great notes, very detailed. And again, Anything Co. was well known for, appropriating design aesthetic, and that was a big part of their corporate identity was that design and that aesthetic that they appropriated. And then moving forward, great documentation of early exhibitions. So 1966 is Bag Place at UBC, fantastic notes again, act and art, so aesthetically claimed thing, aesthetically rejected thing, a body of work of theirs, utilizing these acronyms where they would either claim something physically or through a photograph, or reject something physically or through a photograph, and it had the seal of approval and so on and so forth. And it was like this very sort of official thing. So the act and art departments, and then documentation of one of their publishing works, Piles, which I'd previously mentioned, that we might talk a little bit about coming up. And you see an address list here and things like this. This is an interesting one, Chrome Poles Move. So this is a funny one. You could almost look at it like a scientific experiment, where I think it was speculative, if I'm not mistaken, but these chrome poles were placed in a mountain glacier. And the idea with it is that in the spring, you could trace the poles' movements as the snow melt. Another work we could see, maybe a more recognizable work, is Anything Co. Landscape. So these were a continual body of work that took place in Prince Edward Island and along other areas in Canada and the USA, if I'm not mistaken. And the idea with this was that this landscape on the side of a highway would otherwise be a pretty boring and banal thing, but by putting this stake in the road, they've kind of claimed this area behind the sign, forcing the viewer to be a part of their artwork. So the notes here say that sign was placed in approved landscape on Prince Edward Island. When a person comes upon the Anything Co. sign, the landscape included is all that one can see from this point to the horizon line. So it's just like this pretty great explanation coming directly from Netco, recounting their works in 1969. This might be recognizable. This is a 1971 work in the form of a 3-inch button that says "Art is all over." And pardon me. The idea with this is that you could probably read it a couple ways, but I think the sentiment is that art is all over, and that meaning that anything could be art. If the intention of the artist was that, and the viewer was instructed to do so, anything could be art. And this kind of goes back to the trajectory of Marcel Duchamp and the ready-made. But I think that that's what that button's for. And the interesting story about this is that this one page in the book was bound backwards and upside down. And after doing some research, I found that the entire edition of 500 copies from 78 was intentionally bound upside down and backwards. And I did learn this to be true from cross-referencing from other copies that I was able to find. But in an interview with Ingrid Baxter, actually, he couldn't recall why or what the significance was. But it was significant enough to me that in the new edition, the page was upside down and backwards too. So here's this is the back cover of the book. And an interesting story about this, you can see here, we've got all these signs of wear, things like this, which were all pretty important to this new edition's creation, which we'll talk about more. But this is an interesting story, is that this logo, Please Complete and Return Anything Company Limited, was actually designed by Alan Fleming. Alan Fleming is a seminal Canadian designer who I believe had a connection with Netco through SFU. And I think the idea with it was that business didn't really ever design their own logo, although Netco totally did design all of their own logos and things. But I think just to sort of fit into this corporate identity, they hired a real designer to design this. And in fact, it was the same designer who designed the recognizable CN logo for the CN Railroad. So it's that C that connects directly into the N. So it's a pretty interesting story. I think that they had just hired Alan Fleming to do some design for them, and I guess that's a bit of an interesting story. So now we're going to talk a little bit about a facsimile. What is a facsimile? Facsimile is the modern practice of reprinting books that are deemed culturally important. When thinking of Netco's Companies Act, I've determined that the book is worthy of facsimile reproduction, but the question is how? By researching artists, books, publishers who specialize in facsimile production, I was able to learn much about the methods used. That said, if you were looking for leading authorities in facsimile publishing, you would find that Austria is where many of the world's most important facsimile publishing houses exist. There, they focus on the reproduction of medieval manuscripts and other historically significant works. And for the purpose of the Companies Act, I felt that it was important to refer to the classical definition of facsimile, which led me to Manfred Kramer. Kramer was a leading figure in facsimile publishing and ran a number of those aforementioned production houses in Austria. Aside from his work in physically publishing facsimile editions, Kramer was also a dedicated researcher and educator in the field as well. So for this reason, his definition is perhaps the most credible. He defines a facsimile as a true surrogate of a book deemed historically important. To follow this definition, every effort must be made to remake it as if it was coming off the press in its original printing. This means that matching ink colors, original pigments, paper, binding methods, decoration, not omitting any pages, even blank ones. By following this, the result will be a facsimile that is useful for scientific and artistic research. In my opinion, this definition rings true, and in most cases would be the best way to remake a historically significant book that provides a useful research tool while not causing further damage, or rather preserving the original copy. That said, is there an exception to this rule? I think that in the case of at least just this one publishing project, that there is, and I'll explain that now. So what gets lost when we adhere to Kramer's definition of facsimile? In my next slide, I'll describe reinterpreted facsimile, which I believe addresses the shortcomings in Kramer's facsimile. So we can agree that Netco's Companies Act is a suitable facsimile contender due to its cultural significance and its scarcity, but how did that decision come to be? And what is a reinterpreted facsimile? The reproduction of Companies Act itself was based off of an ambiguous copyright in my original copy's colophon, stating the material in the Anything Co. book can be used by anyone, anytime, anywhere. Please let us know when you do this. So circling with the cursor on my mouse, I'm circling this original copyright from 1978. You know, this type of language wasn't surprising to me, as I knew that Netco were well known for inviting others into their conceptual works through the use of words and statements. A great example of this would be their 1968 book, A Portfolio of Piles. The piles themselves, considered artworks, also based on the trajectory of Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades, came with an address directory in the book. And you know, these photographs of piles, along with this address list, encouraged readers to visit industrial areas in North Vancouver to go find them. Cheekily, the address directory disclaimed, due to the nature of piles, Anything Co. cannot guarantee that all piles will remain at these addresses. You know, so you can see this is sort of, you know, a funny way that would make something pretty boring into something, you know, potentially different and not boring. And you know, in the case of piles, the lesser considered activity might be, you know, driving to a weird industrial area and finding, you know, a pile of chains if it still matches the same address. And looking back to Companies Act, in this case, the Copyright in Companies Act asks the reader to respond to the book and do something with it, perhaps leading the reader to a lesser considered act of reprinting and redistributing the contents within, therefore inspiring the 2020 Companies Act facsimile reproduction. Based off this copyright, would a facsimile following Kramer's definition suffice? It's my opinion that it doesn't. Thinking of Anything Co.'s work, to me, demands interpolation. So that's, you know, demanding that something new is injected into it, you know, not just copying exactly what has been done and making it look like it did in 1978. I don't think that that's what that copyright is asking for. I think it demands something different. My response to the oddly phrased copyright is what I term the reinterpreted facsimile, a new artwork that expands upon Anything Co.'s artwork ideas, Anything Co.'s artworks and ideas, and at the same time makes the out-of-print book available as a research source and to all those that might be interested in it. So what follows are a series of production-based case studies that I use to explore and execute the reinterpreted facsimile of Companies Act 2020. So the first study was a performative pre-press design disassembly process. As no original files or plates for Companies Act exist, my original copy was used to make the 2020 reproduction. Because of the book's condition and size, typical book scanning would have been burdensome. So the book itself weighs 3.8 pounds and is when opened like more than 22 inches wide. So even just handling it and reading it is quite difficult. So scanning it would have been kind of difficult too. So that's where this idea of full disassembly came from. And the action was also just a response to the copyright itself that was, you know, demanding that you do something with the book. And also, you know, responding to a story told to me by Ingrid Baxter. In an interview with him, he described the collating process of the 1978 edition as taking place in a warehouse in North Vancouver, where each of the 365 pages were in separate stacks of 500 sheets, the book's edition size, and then they were paginated by hand before going to the bindery. Aside from the pre-press functionality and performative nature of this action, The disassembly also just helped me to visualize that 1978 collating process and provided a new perspective of the book. So unbound and in an exploded perspective. Kadayun and the book fair have got a video that they'll play. It's a short 1-minute video, and it's just contextual piece of information to show a little bit about what that actual disassembly process looked like. So I'll just I'll let that go, and I'll be right back with the next slide afterwards. Awesome. Just wondering, is my, can everyone see the presentation slides again? Awesome. Okay, good to know. So this last slide here of the disassembly process kind of gives a very cropped view of what that was like. This is probably like maybe one quarter or 1/8 of the book's pages. So it actually took up almost the entire floor of a very large floor space. So after that disassembly process, I was able to scan and categorize each page. So here's the book fully disassembled, and you can see like the cracked old glue in the spine. It's actually taped together because it needed to be ripped apart. And then, you know, that's my high fidelity organization tactics. And, you know, this is sort of that, this is exactly how this facsimile was made, was by scanning the physical pages in order to make high quality offset plates, as those original plates or files didn't exist. And next would be the actual editing of the pages. This is a fairly exhaustive and very technical process. The result would be the most purposeful. You know, actually, you know, I kind of missed something here, which I'll talk about really quickly. But essentially, I was in this process. I was, you know, I was able to really inspect each page, and that's where I noticed much of the patina, the yellowed pages, the stains of all types, markings and cracks, and it was definitely at this point that I really began to conceptualize how to respond to these markings regarding the new edition. Now moving on to the editing process, this was the actual editing, and it would kind of be this important element because, you know, this is the purposeful inclusion of the age-produced patina. This collaborative task between my partner in Brick Press and I, it involved removing the yellowed paper background, but at the same time keeping certain elements of age. So here we can see stains in the paper, and you know, the result being a usable and as close to faithful reproduction of each page, but also a new work in itself. The significance of these elements is a design decision based on aesthetic choices inspired by the original. An extremely useful book, yet rough. with qualities like Xerox photocopy and collage. In some cases, copies of copies of copies of photographs and articles. So, you know, even in the original, some of these photographs, the contrast was just so terrible that you could hardly make any of them out. So, you know, by emphasizing and keeping these elements of where I think that kind of complements this this patina and you know, what I hope to do is kind of shine a light into my interests, you know, through the aura of the Xerox photocopy, you know, a very you know, prevalent method of reproducing, especially in that time, and especially in business, you know, corporate operations. That was something that was very, very common. So the next case study would be reproducing the cover of Companies Act. It was perhaps the most exciting part about this book's production. That said, it might also be the most important. Book's cover is what a potential reader sees first. It needs to attract the reader, and you want the reader to continue and open the book. So the, you know, and also the book's cover is also the only part of the whole production that utilizes color printing. The book itself is a monochromatic book, and that was probably an economical decision in 1978. But, you know, the cover having this extra added dynamic of color, that's a big thing, and that helps to draw people in to picking up a book. But you know, itself was a very challenging process. It required scanning the torn in half cover, extensively editing it, including characteristics that I felt supported my earlier comments regarding the aura of the photocopy and the aesthetic choice to include patina and signs of age, disinclude visual elements that I felt took away from this concept. So things that I would talk about there was like, you know, this sun yellowed appearance. It actually just didn't translate very well into the new plate files for making the covers. So it's sort of, how do you keep these aesthetically pleasing elements of age and patina and disinclude visual elements that take away from that, was something that, you know, was of important consideration. And so this last photo documents the print-ready artwork for offset plate making. For the purpose of light exposure and offset plate making, the artwork is in grayscale. The black areas are the print areas that pick up Pantone color ink, and the white areas are negative non-print areas that will be left unprinted on the paper. I was quite excited of the result, as this is a particularly, you know, it's tough to know how a digital PDF print file translates first to an offset plate and then onto paper. And it's totally difficult to determine until you see it in person. So, you know, with that result, it was kind of like opening a present on Christmas morning or something. You're just like super excited that it actually worked, and, you know, that you haven't wasted potentially lots of money and materials and things like this. And so moving on to the last case study, which is a very important one. This case study actually took place during the book's physical printing here at Brick Press. These are all like actually on press, on plate amendments made by me to address the existence of Ingrid Baxter's contribution to Netco being historically and currently minimized. As an artist and a publisher expanding on an Anything Co work, I had to make efforts to better understand the history of Netco and not take the reader for granted. And in my research, I found many essays citing this minimization, including my own new discoveries that are the focus of current and ongoing future research, which I won't talk about today because they're you know, aside from this project. But more importantly, Ingrid Baxter herself told me of many instances how this has and continues to be a problem. These particular edits or amendments to the book are a relatively small gesture that's included in this 2020 publications edition. But I do feel that discussing this is important to this project, because by not attempting to create a dialogue or not confronting this issue as complicit, it further minimizes Ingrid Baxter's role in the Anything Company. And I personally think that her miscredit is a disservice to the company. And, you know, it's definitely that team dynamic when I first learned of Anything Co. was that team dynamic and the duo that made them so special, or at least to me. So finding out about that was, and I found out about that quite early, but the continued things is, was important to look at that. So contextualizing this, and I'll show a couple examples here. So this black with silver, this is actually an offset plate, and these are zoomed in articles included in the book, and how it reads is: the 33-year-old conceptual artist and his blonde wife, Elaine, spoke to students at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design this week. And I know from scratching plates on other printing projects that if you scratch a plate, you actually just have to print a new plate because it transfers onto the paper. But in this case, that informed the decision, hey, I can make some on-plate amendments and reinterpret history a little bit and just fix this. So now in the edition, it reads: the 33-year-old conceptual artist and his wife, Elaine, spoke to students at the Nova Scotia School of Art and Design this week. And then similarly, in the 70s, another article, and a lot of people write about these articles specifically. So when I see them on the plate, it was, thinking back to authors like Nancy Shaw and, others who many historians who cite this, and, the ability to fix it was sort of like, it was there. So this one reads: the young Canadian married a pretty blonde named Elaine, and together they produced 2 children and the Anything Company. And, with a thumbtack, it now reads: the young Canadian married Elaine, and together they produced 2 children and the Anything Company. So again, relatively small gesture, but I think, just sort of mentioning this as a part of this project, hopefully addresses the broader issues of misogyny in contemporary art and historical context and continuing context. So that was the last case study in this book production. And now returning to Kramer's concept of the facsimile is useful to bring this together into a conclusion. It gives others working in the field of facsimiles some new tools and concepts. He has, of course, made a significant contribution to the field of facsimile publishing, but his definition has overlooked things like patina that books take on over time, and how these aesthetic qualities in some cases, and at least in this one, add to a facsimile. In this book's context, the gritty photocopy-like quality complements the original production method, a rough yet useful form of publishing. Other things like issues of sexism that may exist in historical texts are possible shortcomings that remain in facsimiles too. By studying the facsimile and determining specific areas that fall short of a new edition, I have defined a new facsimile, one that includes or disincludes elements important in the republishing of historically or culturally essential books. In the Companies Act 2020 new edition, it successfully takes on these new ideas about book reprinting. On September 22nd, 2020, the edition of 500 was released worldwide through the book distribution company DAP and artbook.com, and as well as through Brick Press's website, brickpress.ca. And besides being accessible for the first time in over 40 years, the new edition of Companies Act has responded to a new definition of what a facsimile is and can be, and is also a valuable tool for researchers in the field of art history that are interested in the Anything Company. By reinterpreting Kramer's concept of the facsimile through an artistic practice that uses editing, graphic design, and offset lithograph production, this project has become a new artwork, makes the rare first edition available, and at the same time, established a new narrative stemming from the individual copy used for its reproduction. By including visual elements through design into the new edition, departs with the idea, time passes, ideas remain. Therefore, in my opinion, successfully determined that facsimile production needs more flexibility as not to lose valuable opportunities in future book reproduction. I term this a reinterpreted facsimile, and through Brick Press, I'll be continuing to pursue this line of research and studio practice. In addition, the revelation about Ingrid Baxter's historiographical minimization that has come about as a result of producing this facsimile holds much promise for continued and future research, moving towards a better understanding of Ingrid Baxter's miscredit and ongoing sexism in the arts is something that I'm keen to keep at the forefront of my research in the years ahead. So that's the end of my slides. Thank you. I thought to see, I think I should maybe be at about 30 minutes or so. Do I have like maybe 5 more minutes to show a couple other contextual things? Okay, I'm going to do that. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm just going to bring up Brick Press's Instagram, and I'll bring it into the shared screen. And just give me one moment while I get this prepared here. So I think that you should be able to see this. And I've just got a couple things to bring up, just for added contextual information. This is really interesting. So this video here, what I did was sort of another part of this project by responding to that copyright was sort of like in an anything co fashion, making everything an artwork. So I termed this, it's Anything Co. Companies Act 2020 process series. And then this one is called Collating, a Anything Co. book. So each of these processes are deemed artworks themselves. And this is a really interesting video in terms of, providing insight into the production process, where here we've got a bindery expert at Original Print Bind who is collating 24 pages at a time, aided only by a rubber fingertip. And so the entire book's printing was done at Brick Press, but we worked with a vendor that we're close to called Original Print Bind at Delta to do the bindery. And it's just interesting because Original Print Bind and almost every other printing and bindery operation uses industrial machinery, especially ones like automated multi-bin collating machines. But in many cases, handwork, this is what this is called, handwork, is a preferable method of completing tasks. And this particular one for Companies Act was over 200,000, or actually nearly 200,000 lifts. And so the really, really interesting thing about this is that in the beginning of the 78 copy of the book, in the credits, it says that the book was bound at Superior Reproductions in Vancouver, which at the time was one of hundreds of printing shops in Vancouver. Vancouver had so many printing shops. Like if you walked on Broadway in between Main and Canby, there was probably 100 just in those blocks. So if you think of the rest of the GVA, just tons and tons and tons. And coincidentally, this is Maisel, and Maisel's sister, Monica, they worked at Superior Reproductions in 1978. And they were 14 and 15 years old at the time. And that was actually the place where they got their start in the printing industry. And they've now been working as in the printing industry for over 42 years. So I just, this sort of is a pretty fascinating part of the book story to me. Moving on, this is kind of interesting. This is the press running, which, it's exciting for me to see. This is like kind of one of the funnest parts about book making to me is the physical printing of it. But going back to this Anything Co. Companies Act process series, this is printing an Anything Co. landscape. So just like Anything Co. put a sign in the ground, they claimed the background of the sign to be an Anything Co. landscape. And one might consider printing this a page of a book, but I in fact would just claim that it's physically printing a Anything Co. landscape. So just another way to conceptualize this bookmaking process, which I think sort of adequately addresses Ingrid Baxter and Ian Baxter's request in that copyright, where they had hoped that someone would do something with the book, and this is sort of just one of many ways that I could have added into that. I think this is an interesting part of process we could look at. So you can see here we've got like the cover bindery test, so making sure that it fits all the pages properly, so on and so forth, and you do all that in preparation. And then moving on, we've got, these are just like printed pages. So for the Printing of Companies Act, the press was running about 8 hours a day for, many, many days. I think we were printing roughly 30 to 50 pages per day, and there's 365 pages. So I think per day we were printing roughly 30,000 sheets of paper. And by the end of the production process, was nearly 200,000 sheets. So here's just like, it's too bad I don't have any photographs of like, this table just being filled with thousands of sheets of paper. I do have them, but I don't have them available for this presentation. But you can see here, we've just got, this is just process of the machine running at a very high speed, printing 500, putting a new plate on, printing the next 500, putting a new plate on, printing the next 500. And then this is actually the book. This is actually only half the book. So there's 2 pallets like this that make the book up. And those were all collated by hand, 365 sheets. And then each of those stacks, there's 18 stacks that are all collated, and then they get married together. So that's taking one stack and putting it on top of the other in preparation to be bound. So that's, just another bit of contextual information. And I think with that, I'm gonna close with that. And I just want to say thanks again for taking time to be here, and thank you to the Vancouver Art Book Fair for having me, or for having us. And I don't know how much time is left, but if there is any, and anyone has any questions, I'd be super, I'd be happy to try and do my best and answer them for you. So thanks again.
Thanks, Ryan. Can you stop sharing your screen for a sec?
Yes. Oh, let's do that. Pardon me.
No
okay.
Thank you for that. That was just the disassembly of that book. I was like, just like, no, but also wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to check. Am I back on the screen now?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yeah. So I think we have time for a few questions. I had wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned being in contact with Ingrid and Ian. So I just wanted to ask if that was part of the process, or if you just felt that that line kind of gave you the liberty to move forward.
So that's a good question. To be honest, I talked to a number of colleagues and even like a family member who is a lawyer and things like that. And like I was kind of even wondering to myself, I'm like, I think that this is just permission. Like I don't think that I need to ask permission. And I was sort of battling this idea, like, is it more Anything Co, or is it a better response to Anything Co to just like do this and not say anything? But what ended up happening after a lot of time and consideration, I thought that the best thing to do would be to reach out to both Ian and Ingrid and get their permission and blessing, and kind of in hopes to also learn more about them and hear stories in hopes of it sort of adding to the new edition. So, but no, I think at first it was just going to be like guerrilla warfare, like go for it. And because, most times, not that I have tons of experience with it, but I think a facsimile production is like a fairly laborious process in gaining permissions and image rights. And as a autonomously run, non-funded publisher, we never really get to do that kind of stuff. So when this came about, I was like, oh, we're just going to do this. And, but then at the same time, it was kind of like, I actually think that something a bit more special could come about. And the end of it is that I've actually like become very, good friends with the Baxters, more so with Ingrid and also Ingrid and Ian's daughter, Ariane. I speak to them, like I go for coffees and speak with them like fairly frequently. And it's ended up being like, a couple of years of a fantastic sort of like back and forth. I love learning people's stories. So it's a pretty special thing to be able to have gotten that opportunity.
Thanks. There is one question that came in around asking where you found the book and what your story is behind it.
For sure, yeah. I kind of touched on it, but basically the long and the short of it is that I found a copy of Anything Co.'s 1968 book, A Portfolio of Piles, literally on the top of a pile in McLeod's Books. And for those of you who are not from Vancouver, McLeod's Books is a used bookstore that's been around forever. I'm pretty sure it's the bookstore that was in whatever that movie is, The Never-Ending Story, Atreyu and whatever. But I think that it might be, that's the bookstore. But anyways, it's like, there's probably like 100,000 books in there. I think the last time I tried to do the research, that was sort of their answer to me. So it's just like a place filled with books. And I think that a lot of Vancouverites can relate in saying that a visit to McLeod's results in finding a book that you have a personal experience with. You get it, you take it home and you enjoy it. And it's like, oh, I found this amazing thing, and so I found the Portfolio Piles books, which, was a book that I'd really wanted to own for a long time. And it's one of my favorite art books out there. And I couldn't afford it that day. And as a consolation, the owner brought Companies Act, the big blue book. And I had never seen it before. I'd never heard of it. And it was, I think it was $200 and Piles was $275. And I had $200. So I just bought Companies Act because I knew that it was special. I could just, from feeling it, I was like, oh, I'm going to buy this, And then, by the next time I had visited McLeod's, Piles was gone. And I was sad about that. Because copies are very expensive of that book. Like, you'd never be able to afford a copy now if you're not like a invested art collector or a book reseller, which I'm not. I'm more of just a book lover. And $200 for a book is like about the most that I would ever spend. And even that's just crazy, well, it's not, but it is if you don't have money. So, I mean, but the funny thing about it is that, finding that copyright in the book and whatever else just like made that coincidental happening like much more significant, where, I would have loved to have had that original copy of Portfolio Piles that I really wanted, but at the same time, the more affordable option that day resulted in what's now been like an 8-year and ongoing journey. I've met like so many different people. I actually ended up, this was a project that was going to happen regardless of timing, but I ended up joining a graduate studies program at Emily Carr at the exact same time that I was going to get going on this. So it was like, oh, this is going to be my thesis project. And so through like an instigated research process, like through Emily Carr, it's like it turned out to be like a really special project for us here, and it all stems from McLeod's books, and it's that's it. The long answer to the short question.
Well, thank you, Ryan. So for anyone tuning in, please go check out Brick Press at the Vancouver Art Book Fair website. The book is available there. So
I'll just hold it up too.
Yeah.
I should have done that in the talk, but it's physically here.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Hey, thank you, Vivian, and thank you everyone else.